Please welcome moderator Frank Rego and the participants of the Innovative Communities Create a Roadmap to Decarbonization panel.
Aloha kako. Welcome back from lunch. Today's panel is entitled Innovative Communities Create a Roadmap to Decarbonization. Local communities from Hawaii to New York are taking up the challenge of carbon reduction and mitigation and working to strengthen our economic, social, and environmental well-being through the creation of a new energy economy. These communities in various ways are literally creating a roadmap through policies and actions that point the way to opportunities for the private sector and the public at large to be a part of this dynamic movement. Thus, I'm pleased to introduce the members of our panel this afternoon. To my right is Robert Rocky Mould. I'm going to keep calling you Rocky, is that okay? Energy Program Manager for the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency for the City and County of Honolulu. Next to him is Lucinda Smith, Director of the Environmental Services Department for the City of Fort Collins. And finally, we have Ben Sullivan, Energy Coordinator for the County of Kauai. Rocky, let's start with you. Give us a rundown of what the City and County of Honolulu is doing in the office called Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency, which is a tall order and certainly a mouthful.
Thanks, Frank. I've had some practice saying that. There we go. So first of all, I want to thank the Maui Economic Development Board and the sponsors and the organizers of this worthy event. Also want to say how honored and humbled I am to be up here speaking in front of the Hawaii energy ecosystem, one that I've been part of for so long and I've rejoined in this new capacity. Going over the, hearing and also folks that have come from the mainland and from Japan and internationally to provide their perspective as well. Welcome and thanks. So I've, again, listening to the panelists and the programs over the last couple days, it's really been great to hear this history of HCEI and sort of where we came from, how it got started, the challenges, the opportunities, the successes, and sort of where, what it's going to take for us to get to the next step. And, I'm really thrilled that I feel like I'm in a position that is taking that next step actively. And that's this is really policy innovation at work. And it's the creation of the Office of Climate Change, Sustainability, and Resiliency. In November of 2016, two things happened. First, there was a charter amendment for the Honolulu in the vote, and the voters overwhelmingly voted to create our office. Also, they created, in that vote, there was a climate change commission, which has 5 scientists that help us develop policies to address climate change. Also, the City and County of Honolulu had been applying for a grant from the Rockefeller Foundation, and we won that grant. And so now we're a 100 resilient city. And so we've joined together with a number of other cities. I'll show it in a second. But it's our job really to instill climate change, sustainability, and resiliency in city operations, to coordinate with other agencies, and to reduce reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So here's the 100 Resilient Cities Network. So other cities like Norfolk, Virginia, Miami, Mumbai, they're part of this network. So we're working with them in a consortium to figure out the challenges that are facing cities as it relates to climate change today. And here's and one of the main outputs of this is building a resilience strategy. And so what this means is we're going out to the community and we are talking with at neighborhood boards. We're going to hit every single neighborhood board, and we are getting their feedback on what they see as the major challenges facing us related to climate change. So that's going to take place through about March. And for the rest of the year, we're going to be developing this resilience strategy. And so when we talk about resilience, basically we're talking about two things. We're talking about acute shocks. These are like punches to the gut that hit you like a storm, a hurricane, or a financial crisis that you can bounce back from. And the other one we're looking at are chronic stresses, and these are things like income inequality and aging infrastructure. Essentially, we're building a plan to adapt and mitigate these. And of course, what's causing this is greenhouse gas emissions. So the 110 million tons of man-made global emissions that are going into the air every 24 hours are a challenge. That picture right there is one of my favorites. This is the one that keeps me up at night. This is a composite photograph of all the named storms in the 2015 hurricane season. You'll notice how lucky we were not to have been hit. And what's really interesting is everywhere else, when a hurricane misses, Miami, it gets hit somewhere. So Miami has neighbors that are telling them, hey, hurricanes are really bad. If it misses us, we get no feedback from close neighbors. So really, our focus is to implement the Paris Climate Agreement. Mayor Caldwell, along with other mayors, and the governor, have committed to staying in the Paris Agreement, and it's our job to implement that, to figure out what that means and create goals. The other thing is to improve. We're improving city efficiency in building and plants, and then we're developing this resilience strategy. So a little humor. I love this slide because we're not only addressing climate change and becoming cleaner and greener and more efficient, we're also creating opportunities for the new economy moving forward and really working to create jobs and opportunities for the people of Hawaii and Honolulu. And with that, thank you very much.
So Lucinda, you have an interesting story to tell. You've been working on carbon reduction strategies for decades, and eventually, with the lessons learned, it's evolved into your present platform to create a new energy economy. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Great. Thank you so much, Frank. Before I start, I'd like to thank the conference organizers, Frank and Doug and others, for inviting Fort Collins to come. And for me personally, it's really a pleasure to be here. It's my first visit to Hawaii, and it's certainly beautiful. And I've also learned a lot. Hawaii is leading in renewable energy, and so some of the challenges that you're facing now are things that we may be facing in Fort Collins at some point. So I wanted to give a little bit of grounding on about Fort Collins. We're a mid-sized community in Colorado, population about 170,000 along the North Front Range. We're a college town, so Colorado State University is there. And beer and microbreweries is one of the important industries, but not the only one by any means. We also have high tech and the government sector in Fort Collins as well. Something that's really relevant to decarbonization is the fact that we have our own municipal electric utility. And so that allows us to have an energy policy that reflects Fort Collins citizens' hopes and desires. We also are 1/4 owner of our power generating authority because our municipal electric utility is a distribution utility. Platte River Power Authority is the generating source, and our sources are really 65% coal, about 20% hydro, and then 14% renewables, with only 1% of that being distributed renewables. But we do have a good cooperative relationship with Platte River Power Authority, which really makes a difference. So one thing I want to start by saying is that one of the panel moderators yesterday talked about what gets measured gets managed. And so I really believe there's significant power in goal setting. And in Fort Collins, we are actually now on our 3rd set of community carbon reduction goals. And over time, we've had this commitment to report and track our progress, and that has been a significant driver for us to be able to make progress. And most recently, it has really helped set and send a market signal. So what you can see there on the slide is our community carbon reduction goals, with the end goal being carbon neutrality in 2050, and then an 80% reduction by 2030. And that's the most significant and challenging milestone to meet. I think we're on track to meet our 2020 goal, and right now in 2016 we were 12% below 2005. But some of the things that have supported our progress really are other policies, the energy policy work, the transportation objectives, including we have a goal to achieve 20% bike share in our transportation mode split, and we have a ways to go to reach that. And then we also have a zero waste reduction goal, and that picture there, by the way, is our Chief Sustainability Officer, Jackie Kozak-Teal, her daughter's throwing recycling into our new recycling facility. But one thing I wanted to mention that I think has made a difference in our ability to make progress is this implementation infrastructure that has been established since the 2015 goals. And two aspects in particular are we have a climate Action Plan Executive Committee that meets twice a month and has since 2015, made up of executives, sort of cabinet level folks at the city to help guide our progress. And then the other aspect is the Climate Action Plan Citizen Advisory Committee that meets quarterly and advises staff and really tries to represent the triple bottom line. So because our carbon footprint is 50% from electricity, we do focus on energy a lot, and we have through rate-based fees, we are able to offer programs that support both renewable energy and energy efficiency. We have commercial and residential solar rebates. We have one community solar garden, and we also have a small solar power purchase program as well. But city government cannot do this alone, and so we really recognize the value of partnership, and we think about partnership from a triple helix approach. That's recognizing the unique abilities and capabilities of the government sector, academia, and the business sector, which includes both private and nonprofit. And one of our first public-private partnerships was called Fort Zed. I don't know how many of you here have heard of Fort Zed. It seemed to have greater international recognition in the energy community than it did in Fort Collins, but it was a collaboration that had some successful projects, including an RDSI project and also a behavior-related project. But last year, the steering committee chose to disband Fort Zed. It had kind of reached the end of its sort of maturity model. And now we have moved on really to thinking about this and trying to approach our climate work from a climate economy perspective. So in 2016, we were able to hire a climate economy advisor who's working to develop a climate economy action plan for Fort Collins, working simultaneously on hopefully quick wins like bringing commercial pace, but also longer term strategies to reduce barriers to accessing capital. And that's the Climate Economy Advisor has enabled us to participate, for example, in the Bloomberg Mayor's Challenge, where our project for innovation is looking at how we can bring in capital to help low-income renters achieve energy efficiency. So, in many ways, also, we try to think of the role of the city government and what's appropriate and how can we be a platform to support innovation. And so we call that approach City as a Platform. And just as the speaker from San Diego talked about today, we're intentionally trying to lower barriers to provide what types of assets the city has, which include certain kinds of data, certain infrastructure such as streetlights to help support innovation. And we're continuing to work on that and recognizing that we cannot make enough progress alone, so we really need these partnerships. And so I'll end with that and look forward to the conversation. Thank you.
Well, Ben, you are all about data. I've heard you say this at energy efficiency charrettes and other venues. One does not get to where Lucinda is now in the city of Fort Collins without establishing benchmarks. So I want you to talk a little bit about what the County of Kauai is doing in terms of establishing some carbon benchmarking.
Thanks, Frank. Before I do that, I really want to thank these guys because they're both an inspiration, I think, in different phases of evolution of their climate offices, but something to look up to. You know, we're a small county. We have very limited resources, but certainly we recognize that, you know, our programs are going to evolve over time. And I can't tell you how much of an asset it is to have Rocky and Josh and the whole gang over there working as kind of the core of the network in the state of Hawaii, and we've all really begun to leverage that. I think Ron Whitmore and Fred are in the audience probably, and those guys are a huge contribution to it too, so it's really making a difference in how we work and how we collaborate. So let me start with that and then get into data. On the spectrum of data geek versus super geek, which I think was how Lewis phrased it previously, I think I'm kind of in between. I think I'm more of a data geek than Lewis and less than Eugene. If you guys can figure that on the spectrum. So we're really lucky on Kauai in that the KIUC provides us with an excellent resource in terms of our own usage data and makes it really easy for me to create dashboards that we push out to our staff as far as just managing basically the simple stuff. How are we trending in all of our facilities in-house in order to manage data? And it's as simple as saying, how is this facility performing year over year to date? And is something off? And if there's something off, you make a phone call to the manager and say, hey, what's going on? And they, 80% of the time they know, and they just say, well, there's a reasonable explanation for this. And then the other 20%, you're giving them news, and you together find a solution. So to me, the data is essential for doing the job of energy management within an organization that has hundreds of meters, and it's making a big difference. So Mayor Carvalho in 2013 set a 10-year goal for reducing our energy use by 30%, and we are halfway there, and we are halfway to that goal. So we're at about 15% reduction, which I'm very proud of. Again, could not have done it without the partnership both inside the agencies and with the utility. And Tina, we talked about bragging before, and I really loved how you level set that, but I will say that I'd like to amend your 2 and say perhaps bragging about your utility should be added to that list. And I know there's a lot of guys from KIUC here. I had the privilege of serving on their board quite a while ago. It's an amazing organization, and they bring so much to the table that has reshaped my job. So, I'm the energy coordinator. A lot of people think, okay, that's about electricity mostly. It's becoming more about transportation and electrification of transportation, which I'm really just learning and trying to get my head around. But the evolution is, really we see the progress being made at KIUC and kind of say, hey, they've got this figured out. We don't need to bird dog them all over the place and suggest policies and get in their business. We just need to support wherever we can, leverage the data, make sure we understand what's happening in the policy environment statewide, and then really turn that corner collaboratively with them once again to vehicle electrification. So I'm excited about really all the things we have coming up. 4 counties, electrifying public transit is a big opportunity. My mayor just gave the state of the county this morning and announced we're going to triple our EV fleet, which I think is great. I will say from a data standpoint that electrification of vehicles is a really interesting piece because, when we look at our fleet, we know where the big use is, and it's not passenger vehicles. So although that's where we can move right now, and it's really important to move where you can, it doesn't represent major progress in terms of reducing our fuel dependency. But moving on buses very much will. And eventually moving on things, as the market opens up for things like garbage trucks, very much will, and other vehicles. I think who knows, Ford F-150 is going to have a hybrid starting next year. Pretty good, huh? We're getting pickup trucks. Right after that, maybe we get electric. Give me an electric pickup truck, and that'll be the moment that electrification has arrived. So lots of exciting stuff going on. I'm going to cap it right there, and let's have a conversation.
Oh, awesome. So thank you very much. Okay, so we kind of set a baseline here for our conversation and what's going on in each of our communities here. But all of you represent government in some capacity. So for most people, saying the words government and innovation in the same breath does not come trippingly on the tongue. How do you think local government maintains its traditional interests in public health, safety, and infrastructure while also trying to become innovative, disruptive force for change and a partner with what usually appears to be a much more nimble private sector? So I'm going to get you started with that, but I'm basically a lazy person, so I would like you to have a conversation with the least amount of intervention from me at this particular point. We're just going to let them go and have some fun.
You guys want to take a crack first?
I'll take a crack at it first. So that's a great question because, you know, as government, we use taxpayer funding, and it's really important that we use it responsibly. And not taking action might not be responsible. But one of the ways in which I think government can play a role is to be a catalyst and also to support pilot projects. So, for example, in Fort Collins, we have 2 different innovation funds. One is for the municipal government, where city employees can put forward proposals, and then they're evaluated in terms of their, actually the triple bottom line perspective. But more importantly, we've just been able to develop an innovation fund for the community that's at about $450,000 level, where we've invited proposals from the community, and they're again evaluated both on their carbon reduction, but also on other aspects in terms of do they improve equity, et cetera. And we had the first round of solicitations last year and awarded half of the money and half of the projects. This year, though, we learned from what we did last year that we should engage the community even in developing the problem statements or the questions that we would be soliciting proposals on, because that way we have a better buy-in from the community. So this year, we actually held a community forum and had, I think, 80 individuals ranging from academia to the private sector come and help us develop those sort of $10 problems to which government can only bring $1. So we're hopeful that that will actually bring a little more focus to the proposals and also help steer it in a direction that would be beneficial to all and support private sector innovation.
What do you say, Rocky? I think you should take this one.
Okay, so I think, you know, what government really provides and what we can provide is leadership. And I think we've seen that, and really leadership in terms of setting bold goals and then providing a framework and a landscape that will allow innovation to occur. And, you know, so really we're about, you know, policy, innovation, and leadership. Also, you know, by, you know, driving the new clean economy and by, you know, driving investment and providing a clear investment landscape, we'll be reducing costs across the board for our entire economy. So ideally, it'll provide more resources for those other priorities that we have in government.
So I'm going to take it back to what you said, Frank. You know, I think at some level we're all lazy, and I don't know if it's lazy or if it's just really busy or occupied with our lives. And I think we have to innovate in government. I think the reality of government, and we talked about, you know, really briefly in that pitch session, I was trying to express, I don't know if I did it, how absurdly far away we are from having the funding required to expand roadway capacity on Kauai as an example. We have no chance of doing that, so we have to innovate. You know, if we don't innovate, we're going to be stuck in traffic. And I think that's true in a lot of places, in a lot of areas. And so I think it's kind of bubbling up, but it's also, you know, you need leadership. And luckily on Kauai, we have Mayor Carvalho just charging ahead and working with the other mayors and setting those bold goals. We're trying to follow through with those. We have the, you know, key partnerships, and I mentioned KIUC, but there's a lot of community players who are really stepping up. One of the real drivers on Kauai in terms of transportation is actually public health. And so the public health crew and the people who are about healthy lifestyles are the ones who are really driving mode shift and those conversations about complete streets and safe routes to school and all that kind of stuff. So to me, that's a social innovation. So there's technology innovation, but there's also kind of institutional and social innovation, and all that has to happen. And it's all of us. I mean, I kind of laugh a little bit because when I go back to my desk, I certainly have to challenge myself to say we're, you know, always being innovative. I mean, government is hard, you know, and anybody in this room, a lot of you in the room who work in government know that. But, you know, we eke it out, and we do get opportunities, and very often it's because things reach a critical point and something has to give. So
you're supposed to be talking to each other.
One of the things that I've found helpful is, again, it's to enable larger steps is taking smaller steps first. So, for example, Fort Collins Utilities just passed a time of use, we're calling it time of day rate structure that will be going into place in October. But we were able to do that, I think, only after piloting it. So we did a pilot with actually tested a few different things, and then we're able to prove from that pilot that there actually was an energy benefit and that it would, you know, that there was receptivity to it. And so that kind of information helped our council choose to move forward with that. But that was kind of a policy, others are doing it certainly, but it's a policy innovation thing.
So this is dangerous because it's after lunch, but you're bringing my energy geek out. So time of use is near and dear. And I'm curious what customers you started with in the pilot.
I think, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think it was a representative sample of our utility customers, and I think it was probably residential.
It was, okay. That's interesting.
But I can confirm that with you and the audience later.
Okay, well, let me intervene here. So yesterday I was a lot of people have been mentioning this panel, but I was especially struck by the convergence panel that talked about clear priorities, that talked about setting goals, that talked about developing trust, okay? And consensus is an elusive political commodity, really, in a sense. So when government tries to lead in certain areas, how do you get people to follow? Or at least not follow, but begin to collaborate, to take interest in where, direction is being set, where priorities are being set. How do you get people excited about this and moving in the same direction and becoming a part of the process instead of being sort of, in some instances, the victim of the process?
Right.
Well, I mean, I'd love the answer to those questions, but we're kind of lucky right now in the city and county of Honolulu and in Hawaii. We've created this office, and it was really serendipitous in that, at the same time we were creating this office that combined climate change, sustainability, and resiliency, those three things, the federal government, the federal government pulled out of the Paris Climate Accord, right, and we said we were coming back into the Paris Climate Accord, so there's been a lot of interest in what we're doing. I mean, we have climate change directly in the name of our office, and it reminds me of the conversation earlier this morning between Alice Madden, yourself, and Jay Griffin about, really looking at the positive, things going forward, and I think while there are challenges that we face, you really have to focus on the opportunities ahead of you.
So I would just say that Lucinda mentioned taking the small opportunities, and I really think that rings true for me because they're not all big opportunities, right? And the big projects are some of the riskiest ones in terms of your outlay of resources versus the probability of success. So one example for us, we have a small web-based motor pool that's actually been instrumental in us rethinking kind of our fleet purchases, and really all it is it just allows us, it's a car share for county employees that allowed us right off the bat to get rid of a bunch of vehicles, to have less vehicles serving the same need. And then it also started giving us data on what, how are people moving around and when and in what type of vehicle. And so to me, that was it was a lot of work to get it through government because it was actually a startup company. I think it's long enough. People didn't know it when we first put it together. We just kind of said, we're doing this. But they did a great job. They provided the service, and it's worked out really well. But it's not easy. I mean, one of the things, I think enough time has passed that I can say this. When we first went through the procurement process with these guys, they wanted to kind of brag to everybody in government that it was a startup. And I was like, no. Please stop telling people you haven't been in business for 20 years. Like, this is working, you're standing up on the contract, you meet all the requirements, but if people start thinking that you're gonna be out of business next week, I'm gonna be in trouble. So it was a really interesting thing to me, a small project, but really opened up a lot of doors, and hopefully it will continue to do so. So the small opportunities are really, really a big thing.
So I'll just say, public-private partnerships are really key. We need the expertise from the private sector to do what we do to get the things done. Also, really it's about reaching out to various and trying to break through silos that are within government and get them talking to each other as opposed to being the person facilitating those conversations. So it's bringing all the people from different silos into a room and creating a conversation about the projects and priorities that you have, and getting help from the private sector doing that.
Yeah, I very much agree with that, Rocky. I mean, I see that as a role of government to really catalyze those conversations and bring, like, as you said, people together. And to the question that you asked, Frank, I think there's several ways to try and build support. Kind of depends who the audience is. So if when I think about the average Fort Collins citizen to whom climate change probably isn't on the top of their mind, although there's definitely a majority support for climate action. But in terms of behavior change, what we're working on is really getting simple, relevant messaging and programs on the benefits, which include comfort, increased productivity, as well as cost savings. And by the way, there's also an environmental benefit. So having simple actions that people can take is something that we're working on. And then the other thing, especially for people who are in opposition to regulation that may come with short-term costs, is I think Alice Madden mentioned it this morning, really building trust. And some of that can happen through increased credibility. So in Fort Collins, we've been able to develop our own in-house model to evaluate the cost effectiveness of programs. And we have a senior financial analyst position who's dedicated to some of that work. And so that actually has really helped when we go out and speak to business groups. It doesn't mean that they necessarily buy in, but they can ask the deep questions and we are able to respond. And I think hearing their concerns and having a true dialogue is, as has been said before, really an important step to moving forward. And then just meeting the customer where they are. So I think of one program example where we were trying to scale up a home energy efficiency program and started out by working with a limited subset of contractors, and it just basically wasn't working as well as we thought. We had to step back and actually do really community-based social marketing research to figure out what were the barriers and what were some of the problems. And then with that, we actually have been able to do an Efficiency Works neighborhood program that really did bring more results. It brought 50% increased participation and kilowatt hour reduction, and actually a double 100% increased participation and 50% energy savings increase for the same amount of relative investment. So kind of hearing what people need and listening is an important part of being able to make progress.
So how do you measure all of this? What are the benchmarks that say that whatever you've done in your community is a success? Because people are always asking for results, and you have to give them sort of an idea that whatever money or resources that you put into this, it makes it successful. So talk a little bit about assessing, success, measurements for success.
Well, I mean, I think one thing you really need to do is you need to develop metrics in a very visible, transparent, and open way. And ideally, you develop those metrics with the input of the community. That's what we're doing, going out to the neighborhood boards and meeting and developing our resilience strategy, is we're taking input, putting it in a database, and we're going to identify the top vulnerabilities. But that's all from the input and also our own judgment from the community itself. So, and then we're gonna put those out for everyone to see, and then continually adjust and change those as if needed. But again, I think it's about one, creating a sort of framework of analysis and sticking to that analysis framework, but then identifying the metrics that you're gonna follow through an open process.
So for me, it's a lot simpler. Like my bosses are happy if we save money. So I mean that's one really obvious metric. But like just tracking that and saying hey, wait a minute. Part of our savings is certainly because over the last couple of years the price of energy has come down relative to the price of oil. But part of it is also here's how many kilowatt hours we reduced. And so let's take credit where we're making progress, and let's accept where we failed. But I also, here we are under the lights as if we're experts, right? Because we're under the lights. You guys know that this is hard, and I want to just make sure that the caveat is there that I don't always know how to do that. There's a lot of things we're trying to do that are kind of, pushing the the mindset in terms of how we're approaching these problems. And, you know, I get out there and spend time trying to help community groups run electric vehicle ride and drives. And that's pretty hard to measure. I mean, I could say how many people got in a car and then try to find out from the dealerships how many they ultimately sold, but that's kind of beyond the point. I mean, we're really trying to promote electrification and make people feel comfortable with the possibility. And so those are just, you know, I don't know. Anyone have a suggestion on how to measure that on the short term?
No. But I agree very much that there's some basic things that we can track fairly easily, especially when it comes to electricity or natural gas or things that have a meter. Behavior change is, and the impact of that is certainly harder to measure. And I think it has been helpful that we're able to try and quantify the cost effectiveness of some of the actions, but still our confidence in that ranges from high to low. So we try and share that, you know, we're more certain about this, less certain about that. But I think we are working towards developing metrics that have more community input, like you were talking about, Rocky, that would help tell or frame a story about what's relevant to the community. We're just kind of starting that now. We have a climate dashboard, and it has the basic metrics of what our carbon footprint is and even what each component of it is doing. But that is not exciting to people, frankly. I think what will be interesting is, you know, having the metrics that somehow are more relevant to people. And sometimes it might have to do with productivity or comfort and those kinds of things, and certainly health and all the other co-benefits that are somewhat harder to measure.
Okay. I'm going to move to some questions from our group. Keep them coming in. What has your government organization, and we've talked a little bit about this before, Rocky mentioned it, what has your government organization done to establish or seek out public-private partnerships, and could you give some examples of that?
So I think one of the best examples in the state is the Aloha Plus Challenge. So the Aloha Plus Challenge is definitely a public-private partnership where you have the 4 mayors and the governor agreeing to sustainability goals by 2030, and I think a lot of you people are probably familiar. And leveraging that, but also really having strong private partners who come on board and say, okay, yes, and, or yes, but, and they're at the table very much participating in the development of those goals, gives us a lot of leverage. It's actually interesting to see that process in particular evolve, because for a long time it, you know, almost necessarily evolved at a fairly high level, but there's a thirst for it at the grassroots. I mean, there's people in our community saying, when are we going to get to touch the Aloha Plus Challenge? How does this become ours? And so we're actually thinking through that right now on Kauai and trying to figure out how that, you know, what that means to somebody in a household, and can we try to bring them resources and give them things to do so they're part of it. And that's not easy. And again, that's somewhere I'm just learning, is like how do you hand it over and say it's yours to the community and let them drive? Because ultimately, government is not going to do this, right? Government might lead this if we're lucky and skillful, but it's got to be everybody, and it's got to be community-driven, private sector-driven, all that.
Let's see. Okay, here's an interesting question. Outside of Fort Collins and communities in the islands, what are a handful of the top innovative communities? If you know anything that's going on anyplace else, could you share that with us and maybe describe a little bit what's going on?
There are a lot of them out there. I mean, you know, a lot of the big metropolises have some really cool things going on. I think New York City, you know, where I'm from, before moving here to Hawaii, has been doing some really cool things. They're doing like microgrid demonstration projects that, you know, in Brooklyn that I'm interested in. They have a regulatory framework that's experimenting with distributed energy resources. I think we may be ahead of them in a lot of ways with what we're doing here, but they have sort of a different approach to looking at it in some ways. But yeah, I mean, I'd go with them. Obviously, you know, Seattle seems to be a pretty out there, you know, community and city in doing things with building efficiency and also their transit system.
I'll just add on that New York City, as a great example, we looked really closely at them for their Plan YC program, and also just their innovation around engagement with the public. The Birdie campaign is really something that we were interested in modeling. Austin is another leading community. They have a municipal electric utility, and they've done a fair amount of research looking at sort of full systems integration of, EV to PV kinds of things. They have a research project area called Pecan Street that I can't go into detail on, but there's a lot of great activity happening in Austin as well.
So it's going off all over the country. I mean, we, as a matter of fact, all 4 counties recently joined the Urban Sustainability Directors Network. And that is an organization in itself that is really amazing, but really opens up collaboration among cities and sharing among cities. And I can't tell you how, similar to the collaboration that's happening now in the state, how much of a resource it is to be able to sit down once a year with those people and then work with them on the phone all the time, on common issues, because our challenges in government are different. It's not so much about what are the solutions, it's about how do you implement the solutions, and so often the community comes to you and says, well, just do this. And you want to say thank you for the enthusiasm, but at the same time you're trying to figure out, how do I actually do that, from the desk that I sit in. And so having people in a similar place, or even in a place where it's evolved, in the case of Fort Collins, it's just a huge resource. But I mean, cities, there's cities all over the country, Portland, Boulder, Miami Beach, you name it, that are doing amazing work. And you really got to kind of narrow down to what type of work do we want to talk about specifically.
And it's not all small, it's not all large metropolitan areas. There certainly are small cities leading too, thinking of Burlington, Vermont with the 100% renewable energy objective. So that's exciting as well to see that this can and is happening at different size cities.
Okay, as we're winding down here, I'm going to give you a minute each to, if you were going to tell our group what's the one thing you would like to take away from our conversation this afternoon, what would it be? Got to think about that one, right?
Okay, I've got huge gratitude for the network and just being able to be here and connect with all you people that are constantly, there's so many agencies in Hawaii, Jenny Potter, is that you, Jenny, right in the front? Who last year was working with the National Lab, shows up this year and says, hey, I work with HNEI now, and I actually know a lot about Green Button Connect My Data, which the 4 of us have been talking about a lot and saying, how do we plug into that? How do we make that a possibility in Hawaii? And she's like, I can help you. So, there's so many resources, so many people. The State Energy Office is always there, ready to collaborate. The utilities, in our case, KIUC, but I think throughout the state. I think we're at an amazing place. And so, I guess, let's keep it going. Help us as much as you can and tell us what you need from us very specifically. I love to hear, like I said, from the community when somebody says, get an electric bus, but let's take that a little further. And how do we get an electric bus or whatever the thing might be, right? So just gratitude, really.
I guess I would say that there's real power in community action. And while we might not have leadership at the federal level now, just like you said, Ben, looking at what's happening in communities across the country is really inspiring. And the pace of change that has been talked about a lot already here today, I think we can each see it. And it is escalating, and that is so exciting. So to continue working and supporting efforts at the local level that are partnerships and collaboration, and to maintain optimism and hope seems important.
I would just say that with the creation of CCSR, this new office, the city and county of Honolulu, we're taking a look at energy, we're taking a look at transportation, and we have big plans for that, and we're going to really go for it with those plans and sit at the table in some of the conversations that have been going on over the past few years around energy in Hawaii and join the Hawaii energy ecosystem. So, and we look forward to working with you all.
Okay, that's it for us. Thank you for your kind attention, and let's give a hand for our panel today. Great job, guys.